So I try in this presentation to provide you with a perspective on how we're approaching rare disease treatments in Europe at the moment in a broader spectrum. So I've tried, for some of you, it will be information you already know. For others, I hope it will be an up-to-date. And I try to provide you with the perspective both of EURORDIS, the European Organization for Rare Diseases, but also the perspective from the Committee of Experts on Rare Diseases of the European Union, and also with my past experience from the Committee of Orphan Medicinal Products at the European Medicine Agency. I take this opportunity briefly to say a few words about EURORDIS for the one who are not familiar with us. Thank you for the kind introduction, John. The EURORDIS was created 15 years ago, and we now bring together over 500 patient groups from all over Europe in 48 countries, and that includes 25 national alliances, which at the national level brings together the patient groups to do their advocacy and mutual support and capacity building, and also more than 30 European federations. Overall, we represent 30 million patients in Europe. So that's not only European Union, it's Europe at large, up to Russia. And we have a staff of 25 people in Paris mostly, and also in Brussels, Barcelona, and a budget of around 3 million euros for last year, and volunteers, which is not an easy thing to do when you work at the European scale with different languages and culture. What I'll try to share with you first is the relevance of debating orphan drugs at the international level, and that's quite trivial, I hope, for most of us here. But rarity calls for international approach to experts and to small population. Also, companies act global for their research and development and commercialization when investors think global in terms of their potential return on investment. But regulators are regulated regionally, and they act also locally. And the potential of orphan drug market is certainly global when you think of the market as the targeted patient population for a given rare disease, but the real orphan drug markets, the reimbursement, is very much local, and even sometimes it's not even national, but more a breakdown from national. And your real market size is not the prevalence of the condition or even the prevalence of the authorized therapeutic indication. Your market size is the number of patients really diagnosed, then the one who are responsive to treatments, and then the subgroup of that who have an insurance or are reimbursed. And that takes us back to a very fragmented global market. But rare disease treatments, in our view, goes far beyond delivering an orphan drugs, and increasingly so. It's about putting the orphan drugs or the rare disease therapy in the broader spectrum of access to quality information on the disease, on the diagnosis and care, and on the medicine itself, on access to medicines and access to centers of expertise or experts at the local level, and the use of good practice guidelines for diagnosis and care. So the medicine is increasingly taken into the broader care, which is also supportive care, social care, and etc., and with a long-term vision. When you, as a parent, like Melissa or John, myself, we are, of a child affected, my daughter is affected by cystic fibrosis, I don't look only at the medicine she's taking now. We're looking at the medicine in the long life perspective. And this is what you're managing with your doctors, which, by the way, are changing over the years. And also, it's linked to the data collection system, and I will try to insist on that all along my presentation. Now, in Europe, the way we've tried to approach this is to have a strategic vision and a very much structured approach. We try to integrate the policy at the national level and European level, so to coordinate between the member states, but also integrate national with European level, to have a comprehensive approach going from research to public health and drug development, and including patient empowerment. We also look long-term. We've started 15 years ago, but now in the last year, we're shaping the agenda for the next decade, and we're looking at the year 2020, and I will go back to all these elements. It's very much driven by patient advocacy, and that has been mentioned by several speakers before. That's true in the US, that's very much true in Europe too. And it is developed through partnership. Everything is successful only when we work through partnership. That's very specific to this area, I believe. And we try to create value which is perceived by all stakeholders. And this strategic vision is guided by regulation and directives, which in Europe means law. It is also driven by recommendations and communication, which you could refer as policies or soft laws, and also by roadmaps, programs, guiding principles, experts' recommendation, which I would call technical guidance. And last, the European committees to supervise and implement all that. In the last decade, we've put together the EU regulatory framework right in order to create a favorable environment for the development of rare disease therapies. Obviously, the Orphan drug regulation, that was first, and that was very much patterned on the US experience. The EU regulation on medicinal products for pediatric use a few years later, and after that, the one on advanced therapies. So now we do have the framework in place, and there is other pieces of pharma legislations which I'm not mentioning here. But what a key characteristic which we don't find in the US is the strong participation of patient advocates in all the decision-making process, all the scientific evaluation decision-making process in these committees to implement the regulations. The second key element that we have built in the last decade is this policy environment on rare diseases. And mostly two elements. Something called the communication of the European Commission, Rare Disease Europe Challenges. What is it? It's a text, a policy text that makes rare disease a priority across the European Union on all policy areas. And particularly it defines 6 policy areas: research, drug development, healthcare organization, information, classification and coding, and patient empowerment. And you find these 6 priorities also in the Council recommendation, which is more stringent and imposed to the member states to develop national plans by the year 2013. And we coordinate this approach of national plans so that they are along the 6 same priorities and integrated, as I said before. So this Council recommendation promotes these national plans, but also has created the EU Committee of Experts on Rare Diseases, which now I will refer as EU CERD in the next slide. In this EU CERD, you have the 27 member states representatives with 2 of them. In fact, it's kind of a large committee. Then you have 4 patient representatives, all from EURORDIS, and their alternates, and also industry representatives and academic representatives. So it's more an assembly than a committee, and it works through different processes in order to produce different elements, which I will go back to. Currently, we have 3 main priorities. The EU Directive on cross-border healthcare. That's a tremendously important new law in Europe adopted last year because it reinforced rare diseases as a top priority, but also it provides the legal base for the European reference networks on rare diseases. And so that now we have the legal instrument and we will have the financial instrument to develop them in the next years. It also provides a clarification, I would say, on the mobility of patients in Europe to go from one member state to another to access diagnosis or to access treatments. And it strengthened the cooperation at European level on HTA, which is going to be tremendously important when we think about rare disease treatments in the next years. The European Union works with 6 years framework program. So the public health program and the research program are running in parallel. And for the next period, it's going to be 2014-2020. And here we have already obtained that rare diseases is a top priority on both programs for research and public health. Particularly, we're playing the high community added value, which is to say that there is a good reason to work at the European level even more than at the national level in order to create value for society. And now what we're working on is more on the appropriation of it, on the budget level and on the language of it, so that the detail of the implementation of the program will be consistent with this priority. The phase we are now into is that after defining this regulatory framework and policy framework, we are turning into a more technical phase of implementation. I already mentioned the national plan in member states. That's tremendously important. It's quite obvious that some member states in Europe will have already adopted plans or are developing significant plans, which are robust, with good measures, with good budget, and others are just going to be empty nutshells. And that's all right. We can live with that, because that's only the first phase, and there will be a second phase after that. But on the other hand, we are driving the implementation by the so-called EU Cert Recommendations. These EU Cert Recommendations are short text which are being developed and adopted by the European Committee of Experts on Rare Diseases in order to guide the implementation of this policy framework in the different priority areas. The first area where we have adopted one is the quality criteria for centers of expertise on rare diseases. That was adopted a few months ago in October. And we are now working on the development of the recommendation on the quality criteria for European reference network on rare diseases, and the one on clinical added value of orphan drugs. What it means is that these recommendations then are being adopted by the 27 member states and all stakeholders, as I mentioned, the patient, industry, and academia. So there is high chances that then it is being appropriated and used at the local level in the different national policies. Future recommendations will include one on patient registries in order to create harmonization here, quality testing, population screening, and good practice guidelines for diagnosis and care. I'd like to insist now on the growing international collaboration at two levels. Obviously, at the patient advocacy organization level, EURORDIS and NORD have a strategic partnership signed in 2009, and we already exchange a lot on our advocacy on rare disease and orphan products. So we don't always say the same thing, but we do coordinate. We have taken the Rare Disease Day at a new level. It was created in Europe by EURORDIS, and now with NORD, we've taken it at the international level more broadly, and now there are 63 countries involved this year on the 29th of February. It's very successful, and that's a key instrument to raise awareness, and our goal is to make it in a few years from now WHO or United Nations official day. We're developing online rare disease communities, which are communities of patients and families on the net. And we're organizing conferences series in order to enhance the dialogue in our specific remit in Europe and in the US, but also in a transatlantic way. So EURORDIS organized a European conference on rare disease and orphan products. The next one is going to be next month, in fact, in Brussels on the 23rd, 24th, 25th of May, with about 700 participants from all over Europe and abroad. The US Conference on Rare Disease and Orphan Products, the first one took place last year in October, and the next one will be this year in October 2012 in Washington. And next year we will organize together the Transatlantic Forum for enhancing collaboration between US, Canada, and Europe in some of these key priority areas. This year, we will also launch the Rare Disease International Network, which is to bring together the major patient groups from around the world in rare diseases so that we can speak with one voice and try to turn rare diseases into an international public health priority progressively over the next decade. But in parallel to that, and maybe even more important, there is a growingly structured network with an international perspective. I will not mention all of them, but obviously OrphanNet is one, which is going more international. There is also the work on the international classification of rare diseases in the context of ICD-11. And in the meantime, the ORPHA code is being widely used by many of you probably already. And there is essential initiatives like the International Rare Disease Research Consortium or common infrastructures in Europe on biobanks and registries, which are infrastructure projects for the next 6 years with significant money pledged into it, as well as work on common methodologies to develop good practice guidelines on rare diseases. And that's important because these two elements on biobank registries and good practice guidelines are very much linked, in fact, to the policy of this international consortium. When at the same time, in parallel, from 2014 and beyond, there will be the funding of an increasing number of European reference networks for rare diseases. So this really provides a new environment of which we will see the benefit and the impact in the coming years. I'd like to elaborate a little bit on this eardrake, this horrible acronym of the International Rare Disease Research Consortium. Its goal is to foster policies at international level between the funding bodies, either mostly public funding bodies, like NIH in the US or the European Commission in Europe, and also some of the member states, and also you can see the list of countries, Japan, Australia, South Africa are participating, but also with some private partners, like industry is involved, and also some private foundations. The way it works is not to fund directly any research activities. It generates policy, and then this policy becomes policy of all the participating bodies. So money is going to be the drivers to harmonize some of the implementation of the activities, and that has an impact on registries, on many of the research activities of these funding bodies. The overall objective of the consortium is that by the year 2020, to deliver 200 new therapies for rare diseases and to deliver diagnostic tools for most rare diseases. So that's pretty ambitious, and it does require a disruptive approach, as described by Andrew just a moment ago. In this governance body, patient groups are participating. EURORDIS is part of the executive committee, and NORD also, as well as of each of the scientific committees. I'd like now to show you the impact of this policy environment on delivering the rare disease treatments in Europe. If you refer to the EU Cert quality criteria on centers of expertise, these are some of the main points. It defines what centers of expertise are. What is important is to show that it tries to harmonize the approach between the member states on identifying their experts and then centers of expertise, to take a multidisciplinary approach to it, to bring together the medical and the social care together and paramedical care. It also linked them with the laboratories and with the patient organizations, and it imposed them to produce or to adhere to good practice guidelines for diagnosis and care, and to participate in the data collection. The data collection is going to be increasingly a key role played by these centers. These centers will deliver the best possible care, but will also be the place where the data will be captured increasingly on rare diseases. And also, some of them will be involved in clinical trials. These centers of expertise then are included into the European reference networks. And the vision, that's very much the vision of EURORDIS that I'm providing, as the EU Cert has not yet adopted its recommendation on European reference network. But our vision is not to create European reference network for each and every rare diseases, because we're not going to have 7,000 European reference network, not even 1,000. Nobody can afford that. But what we can afford is to have European reference network, which are by clusters of rare disease, by therapeutic areas, progressively covering more rare diseases in this therapeutic area. And certainly, this European reference network will bring together the identified centers of expertise from the member states, together with the diagnostic laboratories, and also the local experts, which are much more numerous, obviously, than the centers of expertise identified in every member state. And that will need to be flexible. It's not going to be overnight. For instance, let me take one example, cystic fibrosis. It's already well organized and structured. And we can build on this network already to develop the rare pulmonary diseases European reference network progressively over more countries and over more rare diseases in the pulmonary area. There is a growing consensus in Europe on harmonizing rare disease registries to develop rare disease registries first and not product registries, but also to link it to therapeutic research project and public-private partnership involving patient organizations. And there is also consensus on having common data set and standard operating procedures. And the instrument, again, for that will be funding, particularly with the International Consortium, the European Commission, and every member state involved through this policy in the EU Cert and in the EURORDIS. To speed up access, the clinical added value will create the dialogue between the regulatory agency EMA and the HTA, so that there will be more coordination to discuss the clinical development in order to generate the data on effectiveness from the protocol assistance at the time of marketing authorization and after, in order to bridge between this centralized procedure and the national procedures of HTA and reimbursement. So this framework will be important, and that's very much linked to what Russell mentioned this morning on really paying for the value of the drugs and generating data in order to identify the real place of a medicine in the therapeutic strategy of rare diseases. In parallel to that, there is an increasing coordination between the member states on the pricing, and that's something that you may want to follow on. For the moment, it's pretty fuzzy, but there is 11 member states working with the European Commission on how to coordinate in order to discuss volume and price at the European level in the field of orphan drugs. Now I'm concluding with these new paradigms as I see them in this framework, is that it's obvious that increasingly in the field of orphan drugs and rare disease therapies, there is a permanent continuum of evidence generation. The marketing authorization is not a switch on and off. It's a continuous, which requires a better collection of data before the clinical trials, like putting together registries and natural history studies, but also after the marketing authorization, and particularly if we want to gain more flexibility from the regulatory agencies with more conditional approval or adaptive licensing, we will need to have more stringent post-marketing research activities, but also to do the best possible use of all data available, including data from compassionate use, from real-life studies, but also off-label use, which for the moment are not used to assess the benefits of the medicines. We need to focus much more on effectiveness beyond quality, safety, and efficacy. That's essential in our area. We need to show, if we want to improve the quality of care to patients, but also to say to society what we are exactly paying for, effectiveness is the key. We are calling for much more regulatory flexibility and a much more supportive approach. More conditional approval and under exceptional circumstances, progressive approval or adaptive licensing, we're calling for that much more, and we hope that will be implemented without any new legislation. It can be done, at least in Europe, if there is the policy goodwill. And we're also calling with something which may be even more difficult, a change of culture, which is to have an intense rollover process of support to the clinical trial, an open dialogue through the development, from protocol assistance at an early stage, all along the development, up to the market authorization and after, in order to help for success, not to judge, but to help for success, for the benefit of patients. We're also calling for stronger EMA and FDA collaboration, much beyond designation, on protocol assistance, on guidelines for methodology of clinical trials in different therapeutic areas, and marketing authorization assessment for rare disease therapies. We also would like to see earlier dialogue between health authorities and industry in order to address more the unmet medical needs and to have more, maybe, pre-marketing agreements. Fairness and transparency in cost construction and pricing is important if we want to gain more confidence from the payers and from society at large that the prices which are charged are the ones which are really needed and reinvested into future new therapies. To conclude, rare disease is an international public health challenge, and it does require more transatlantic collaboration in order to bridge everything which is today fragmented at the regulatory level and at the access level and in some of the delivery of care. And the key also to that is public awareness. That has been mentioned by several previous speakers, and I'm absolutely convinced on that public awareness is essential to the perception by public opinion and policymakers on the basic societal value and particularly the value of each person, and that people living with rare diseases do deserve to have access to care as any other human being, and that will give the value of orphan drugs. Thank you very much for your attention.